All right, everyone. And we are hopefully recording live.
Cool.
Right. Oh, hey, Cory, how's it going?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
Good. So, yeah, hopefully this will work out. Having a little bit, but hopefully we'll survive this. So. I want to thank you for joining me today. I usually do a little introduction, but I'll make it brief. So this podcast is to explore spirituality, psychology, religion from different perspectives or from a perspective that usually isn't dominated by uh, materialistic atheism or dogmatic religion. So this show offers a third perspective. So I just wanted to start by just sort of introducing the topic for people who will be watching this now or during the recording. Cory is a seminarian working on his master's in divinity, and I wanted to talk to him today about his journey to becoming a Swedenborgian and what inspired him to decide to become or begin to study Swedenborgian theology and so, Cory, I just wanted to start by asking if you could maybe tell any of the listeners just the beginning of maybe when you decided that you had some sort of consciousness of spirituality, or what was your earliest attitude about God and religion, if you'd like.
Sure. Well, I grew up in a moderately religious family under Protestant Christianity for the most part. My grandfather was a Baptist preacher, and I attended his church until he retired. And then my family, or at least my mother and my brother and I and our aunt, started going to the Salvation Army, which, believe it or not, is a Protestant church. But I don't think I ever quite really believed. My father, the son of the minister, he had converted to Islam actually, and now he's Baha'i. But throughout that process, he was reading all kinds of texts, Vedic stuff, and anything like off the wall stuff. And he would lecture me for hours and hours, actually. and so I got a lot of exposure to different things, and he was pretty much against like Athanasian Christianity, like kind of some of the key doctrines within like Protestant Christianity. And I think that kind of had me thinking about those types of things earlier than I probably wanted to. And so when I went off to college, by then I had already known that, I didn't really believe any of this, and none of it made sense to me, didn't speak to my heart. Especially things around like only we are saved type of stuff, just didn't make any sense to me. And so when I went off to college, I divorced from religion entirely, accepted the mantle of atheism pretty wholeheartedly, and I was like that for a number of years.
Interesting. So it sounds like you were exposed because of your father by a lot of different traditions, and by the time you got to college, you decided that you wanted to separate yourself from a religious identity and become an atheist. So I'm wondering, was it just the transition into college, or was there at any particular moment that you can recall just saying to yourself that yes, you didn't believe in God, you felt comfortable considering yourself an atheist?
I think I kind of came to that conclusion pretty early on. I don't remember one specific moment, and it was definitely long before college, although I stayed in the church, and I was actually pretty involved with the Salvation Army because my friends were there, and I loved the culture, and I loved the camps and everything like that. But I think growing up, I remember like wondering, because I heard a lot about love, especially from my father, and the magic of the world around me and things like that, and I just didn't see it, even though I said I did. And I couldn't, at least the way love was described, I didn't really feel like I was that loving, because I felt like I would treat like people better. and I thought like God would be more accessible in my head or in my heart, and I felt like God was inaccessible because I would sit there and kind of like call out and things like that, and I wouldn't find that connection. And so I think I was like, well, there's nothing really indicating to me that there's a God, and it makes sense that it's just us, or evolution and things like that. And so that's pretty much how I operated for most of my life.
So what was the turning point then for you to go from thinking more in terms of atheism, and then what was it that had you heading back towards a belief or experience of divinity?
Well, a year or two out of college, actually, I was moderately down and out, with work and everything. I was just kind of fed up with things. And I guess, I mean, looking back, that's how I feel like I was. And visiting home with one of my best buds and our girlfriends at the time. And I hadn't, weed's big here in Berkeley. And I don't really partake anymore, but I hadn't smoked growing up because there was pot around me a lot, and I felt like I didn't need to, and I didn't want to lose control. But at this moment in my life, I was like, you know what, I'm going to smoke because my friends were smoking, and I had this really crazy reaction, and it was unbelievable to me. My reaction, actually, I remember kind of like time slowing down or something like that, and me thinking like, oh, F-bomb, what's going on? I think I made a mistake. And I remember Family Guy was playing. We were in my buddy's basement, and I kind of like collapsed on the ground from the couch. I kind of like slid on the ground, really. And I lost control of my body, and then I kind of turned really inward. And I don't remember most of what actually happened, but it was like a life review, kind of like what people say a near-death experience is like. And it was so beyond anything I had experienced. It was a life review and then other stuff. And I didn't have words for what it was at the time, but it was so beyond what I had ever experienced, what I thought was possible, what had entered my kind of recollection and thought, which I thought was all there was with me, right? That it sent me from there, like out on a journey to say, like, to find out what's going on, there has to be something else out there because I was exposed to some of it. And that's kind of what started my journey. So I started like reviewing things that I had heard just in my head and connecting dots and writing like what I thought was going on, essentially, and slowly kind of working up a personal theology, just like the beginnings of one. And after a while, making a few breakthroughs with that, kind of spiritual journey and reading things like the Bhagavad Gita and Love Without End, which was kind of a healing book for me around Jesus Christ, or at least, the name Jesus Christ, and things like that, just kind of searching. I was sharing some of my ideas with my father, and my dad had told me a number of times, actually, to remember the name Emanuel Swedenborg. And he had even given us an old copy of Heaven and Hell. My parents were separated, so it was me, my mother, and my brother. And we weren't interested in looking at it because he had given us a number of books and told us about a number of religions. But at this moment, it was actually a friend of his who overheard us, and she said, "Oh, you should read this book called Proving God." About quantum physics and Swedenborg's writings, because at the time I was into physics and things like that, and science in general, just reading research around that and seeing how it fit with what I was thinking. And it was amazing for me because it gave a broad overview of Swedenborg's stuff, like his general theology, coupling it with the author's ideas around how it connects to physics. And it was so far up my alley, like so in line with what I was thinking. I mean, it was like so much further, but it was so perfect. It was like, like you hear something rational and it just becomes part of you because it's rational. That's what that book was like for me, at least the beginnings of that. And from there, I couldn't get enough Swedenborg. I started reading Swedenborg, and his stuff was even more potent for me, especially since I kind of knew where each of his books fit within what I thought was his general cosmology and theology.
Wow. So it sounds like you had a very profound experience, and that transitioned you into this personal exploration. And then you began reading, it sounds like a number of very important books. And I'm just wondering when you read Swedenborg's Heaven and Hell, because that was actually the first book by Swedenborg himself that I read very early on, and I'm just wondering if you could comment on any reactions that you had from just reading that particular book.
Um, what was your reaction? I don't remember exactly.
Yeah, no, well, I think my reaction was, it was exactly what I was looking for in terms of an idea of the afterlife, because my previous experience had been very much a punishment based theology. I mean, being raised Catholic and then converting to Islam, and I sort of, it didn't sit well with me, the idea of a specific elect few will be saved, and then a bunch of people are going to be punished in hell. But what I appreciate about Swedenborg was the idea that everyone has a chance to um, either go to heaven or hell. It's sort of what's their ruling loves, and they'll find the community that they're supposed to be in the next life. I sort of appreciate that because it didn't have this emphasis on judgment and punishment. So I guess that was my initial a big reaction I had to it.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think I was exposed to some of those ideas possibly before I was reading Heaven and Hell specifically, but I think I had the same general reaction. It's like, and I still have that reaction, right? Like, it makes a lot of sense that the spiritual world is kind of an uncovering of the spirit, and that even the externality there, because you still see bodies and you still see environments, but they represent internal things to a certain degree. And over time, as your external self reveals itself, you find that you fit in, among certain people, certain society more than others. And in fact, although we think of heaven as like a party, it's actually a state, where you put, the good in other people first. You don't put yourself first, the harm of others, things like that. And so people who are against that kind of thing and maybe love to hurt other people, or at least put themselves above other people to other people's detriment, again and again, and then that's their core loves. They have no interest in heaven, and so that definitely made kind of beautiful sense to me. And actually, that idea of like kind of fitting where you fit, in the next life, and it's not like you're not cast into hell, you dive into hell, right? And that idea actually was one I carried from my father, and I remember realizing that, like I didn't know that he had been talking about Swedenborg. I didn't remember the circumstances, but I remember him talking about that idea from whatever he was reading at the time, years and years ago, and that idea fitting with what I felt. Like, it seemed to make sense. And then I went through a number of years where I thought, like, well, of course, like everything in my head's going to be reviewed or something, or at least I didn't know if it was. And so I would like think about that and how that would make sense. And it didn't develop into like a true like belief in God or anything, but it was an interesting type of idea that I carried. And it was funny that it was Swedenborg's idea, I thought, when I found it again, and I haven't run across it with many other faiths, and it was probably from Swedenborg that he was referencing it, that idea from. So yeah, it's such a beautiful concept.
Definitely, yeah. I can relate to that as terms of my mother had been reading Swedenborg for a longer period of time than myself, and I was very much in the thick of being a practicing Muslim. That when she would mention Swedenborg's name to me, and encourage me to check out some of his stuff, I just sort of brushed it aside, like, yeah, okay, whatever. But it wasn't until I read, Swedenborg and Esoteric Islam by Henry Corbin that I found an interesting bridge, because I was sort of on my way out of Islam at that point. and then just realized like, wow, I now is a good time for me to read this guy Swedenborg, and it just sort of took off from there. So
That's amazing.
yeah, yeah,
I just picked up that book, as you know.
yes, yes, yeah. It's a great book, you know. It's a good one. So I guess another question that to ask you. So you started reading Swedenborg. You were getting into it, and what was it that made you decide to uh, go into ministry and go for this as a professional thing, as a calling? How did that happen? How did you go from diving into the writings of Swedenborg to deciding to take the next step?
Yeah, it's definitely quite a step. Well, I got into Swedenborg because it made so much sense to me, and it made sense to the universe. It made sense of science to me. There's no like part of Swedenborg where he says you should just buy into this. He literally says you can only have a faith in something you understand. But then he also says, and the Bible says it again and again, you have to live it out, And for him, that's charity. Like if you're coming from a place of living your beliefs, like if you have higher beliefs, and if they're oriented in love, if you live those, then you have conjunction with God, and that's what creates that relationship, and that's what creates heaven within you. And so I think I went down this process of like, oh, this is really cool stuff. I have to change. I have to, now that I believe this, it's asking me to do certain things, or at least that's what I felt. That's how, it's pretty obviously asking that, in my opinion, when he talks about how important regeneration is and how that's the Lord's work in us, God's work in us. And it's a process of change. It's not a process of, checking off the boxes. And that process started to have such profound effects for me. And I mentioned how I never felt like I loved in the way that I should, and I started to feel like I was approaching that love, and all these other wonderful things, all these changes that were for the positive, and I was my burden on other people, the burden I created for other people was slowly disappearing, and things like that, and just such a beautiful thing to me that it very obviously, I mean, it maybe was already there with the fact that it was so true and so profound for me, but it was very obviously the most important thing that I had encountered, and if there's a field of discipline around that, then I was interested in it. And then kind of going through that process and realizing like, I want to be there for other people who are also seekers, who maybe find the text or maybe find something else. I don't, there's nothing in me that calls to get people to be Swedenborgian specifically, which is a term he would hate, by the way. But so I want to be there for other people, and I want this to be kind of like the core thing in my life, because I don't see myself working very well without it. So they tell me in ministry there's not a lot of jobs and there's not a lot of money or anything like that, and it might be a struggle. And I have other, we can all do other jobs, right? Like I can do something else at the same time if I have to, but to be honest, it's definitely my calling, and something I'm still working on and developing. I'm only a few months into seminary, so it's been an interesting process.
Great. Well, yeah, and that's why I wanted to have you on, because I felt like you'd be a nice contrast to Tom, because I had Tom on the last episode, and he's near the end of his journey, and that's why I was curious to get your thoughts on things as you've began your journey in seminary. So how has it been being involved for just these past few months? How has that experience been for you so far?
Oh, it's been amazing. PSR, Pacific School of Religion, is fantastic. The people here are kind of mind-blowing for me, because they're so passionate. And for those of us who don't know much about the school, I didn't really know a whole lot until I realized that the Swedenborgian seminary for my denomination was here. It's a very justice-oriented, liberal seminary, and it's one of the only, if not the only, major. I think it's under the heading of like a. Well, I think it's mixed religion, but a lot of like Protestant type stuff. But it's the only major seminary that has like these outreach groups to LGBTQ and things like that. That you won't find in your average seminary, and the people here just have like such amazing journeys and stories, and they're so passionate, and that rubs off on you, and you learn a lot. So I kind of picked a better seminary. I didn't know exactly what I was getting myself into, but it's constantly confirmed to me that this was the right choice. And the Swedenborgian, it's the Center for Swedenborgian Studies now, just recently broke off of PSR to become a member school at this broader organization called the GTU, a Graduate Theological Union here in Berkeley, on what we call Holy Hill, which is made up of a number of different seminary type schools. And so, the real reason I was looking at this at all was because that's here, and headed by a number of fantastic faculty, including Jim Lawrence, who I have the fantastic pleasure of being in one of his courses this semester, and that's been fantastic because I know maybe a couple of years since I found the church in St. Louis eventually. After kind of discovering and reading the writings, and although they didn't have a Swedenborgian minister per se, there's a number of fantastic leaders, including a part-time minister and a wonderful, I don't know if lay leader is the right term, but a gentleman named Paul Deming, who's a fantastic guy there. And so I got involved with this denomination, which is actually the more liberal denomination in the country. It's the oldest one. There's only two major ones. I hear about a third, but I don't know much about it. And this is, so as I mentioned, the CSS, the Center for Swedenborgian Studies, is the seminary for that denomination. And that's been fantastic. There's some great students there, including Tom. Although we don't have classes together, I hang out with him and we go to church together. And so, yeah, I love it. It's been an interesting process with the variety of classes and just hearing other people's perspectives. And a lot of my teachers, they're not ministers per se. They're one's an archaeologist and fantastic historian and teacher and a number of things. And so they have differing backgrounds, and they don't really approach the Bible or any text with like, oh, this is divine. They're investigating, where do these texts come from? What was happening with early Christians, or what was happening in the Old Testament? Like, where do these texts come from? What was happening to the people? Why were they writing like this? Even down to like, undercurrents of patriarchy and imperialism throughout the texts, whether it's the Bible or what have you. And then there's also a class I'm taking that's around like spiritual practices. And so you're presented all these different approaches that people have had towards like their own spiritual growth, and Christianity, within Christianity, is only a small part of that. And that's amazing, because for me, that started, you're asked to reflect on these things for your class and read about them and learn about them. And that helps enforce your own practices and develop them and then share them, because we have small groups where we share. And that's fantastic, because, it helps you kind of mold new habits and really investigate your life in certain ways, just in terms of how you spend your time and things like that. So I could probably go on forever about, all the positive benefits that I found being here.
That's fantastic. I mean, it sounds like you're being exposed to different people as far as fellow students, professors from various backgrounds who approach things from different perspectives. That all sounds really fantastic.
And you
And
might be joining us soon, I hear.
yes, yes. Well, I definitely, I have the application, and I'm working towards applying there myself. So yeah, it'll be a great experience to dive into that as well. So yeah, I look forward to it. Um, and so I guess one thing I was wondering is you mentioned the community of seekers, and I know you've mentioned the first church uh, that you attended, and I was just curious, what has your experience been with the denomination overall, as far as like going to convention and meeting Swedenborgians from all over the country, and also North America, Canada included. I'm just wondering what was your experience like in that context?
Yeah, so I guess my first exposure was with the congregation there in St. Louis, and they're such fantastic people. Very, I mean, they run the gamut, um, but very smart, very beautiful souls. Really, just I don't know. I found like a beautiful community there. Small, but it's actually pretty big, to be honest. It's just like people come when they come, right? And so it was really cool to meet people who have kind of worked within the texts and other things and whatever for a while, and people who care about their spiritual growth and things that I was caring about. It was nice to have a community. And then the convention was fantastic because I think it's once a year. So I've attended two of them, and the first one that I attended happened to be in St. Louis, so I got to help out, and that's probably why I attended as much as I did that year. And it was fantastic meeting all the people from around the country who are involved in their various ministries. And it doesn't, there's no cookie cutter ministry, at least within this denomination. It's all over the place. And so it's cool to hear what people are doing, what they're excited about, what it's looked like over the years. And of course, you meet so many wonderful people in general, but you have these ministers who are that I met for the first time at convention. Is the number of ministers, because I think convention's partly something more. It seems to attract people who are really involved because you have to travel and it may cost money unless you're a minister. So I guess that's another incentive for ministers to show up, and that's fantastic too because they've worked with these texts and they've interacted with their congregations and helped to foster community all around the country or world even. And so hearing their experiences and just sharing and becoming part of that community is a beautiful process. And then I was asked by Jim Lawrence to, and I don't know all the process. I know they vote and a number of things, but I was asked by Jim Lawrence to join the board of the Swedenborg Foundation, which is the major publisher for Swedenborg's works, at least here in America. And they have the YouTube channel Off the Left Eye. And that was another thing altogether too, because there's some people from our denomination, but there's also half the board or so is from the other major denomination within the country, and it was cool meeting them, and hearing about their churches and their focus and how they're structured, which is different than our group. And so that was an interesting kind of collide for me to hear from them, how do they think about these things? And it seems like everyone, at least there, I don't know about in general, but as far as I can tell, everyone gets along. It's more just subtle things that kind of over time, cause people to kind of accept a difference between them. But of course, according to Swedenborg, the church is is within the individual, to the extent they live out of love, whether they would call that a church or not. And so the larger church is the community of all the people that do that. So, you don't have to call yourself Swedenborgian or whatever for that to be true with you. And that's kind of the beautiful thing for me is, meeting these people is like, that's how they think. It's not, oh, well, it's just us and everyone else is screwed or anything like that. To be honest, I would say like Swedenborg's really big on, you don't really know the heart of someone else. So interrogate your loves and change and try to become the best person you can be through whatever belief system that you understand that calls to you, that lends itself to those loves, because that's what makes heaven in you. That's what allows God to work in us, because that is God: love, goodness, all those things. And so whether you know it or not, if you're working out of that, then Swedenborg would say that you have that conjunction. And so it's beautiful to meet people that think that way, because I don't know, maybe it has like subtle differences, and not, of course, not everyone in any other religion thinks that way, and other religions are as broad as well and open as well. Like my father, who's Baha'i, I mean, they're extremely open, and you have Unitarian Universalists who are extremely open in a number of different things, and even within other churches, right? You have people who say, well, I don't really buy into that, or whatever, or they don't think about it, or, who knows. But it's nice to have like something to point to and say, okay, we're not going to work out of that mindset. And meeting people that work from that framework, it's kind of a beautiful thing, because it asks you not to really judge. And of course you want to punish the evil, for the reformation, right? And things like that. Like, so if someone murders someone, of course you want to stop them from doing it. You want to catch them. You want to punish them accordingly. But as Swedenborg would say, like Christ or God or the Lord, or that's gender inclusive, right? Is only really about punishment to the extent that it's needed for keeping someone from hurting, or to see like an issue. And punishment's maybe a strong word, because it's like, for Swedenborg, a lot of the punishment is with the crime, right? Like it comes with it. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, it's nice to be around a group of people that don't seem to have a judgmental framework, and that beauty kind of lends itself in everything.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. Number of thoughts came up for me while you were talking, or additional questions. I guess I am fascinated, just to go back to your experience with the Swedenborg Foundation, also your exposure to the general church, and how it relates to the General Convention. So I was wondering, how has it been for you so far to be on the board for the Swedenborg Foundation, and to be involved in that way? How has that experience been for you?
Well, I can't ask for more. I've only been involved since earlier this year, first half of this year. So I've been to 2 gatherings. They have weekend board meetings, and the Swedenborg Foundation has a group of fantastic staff members, including Curtis Childs, who heads who's on those Off the Left Eye videos, and heading that project. And I mean, it's kind of wonderful seeing the work that's being done. I mean, I love the books, right? So before I even knew, like, I didn't necessarily know there were denominations. I didn't know what was going on. I knew I loved the books, and so the Swedenborg Foundation's on the side of those books. I have them up there. That's why. Wait, am I on video? I wanted to ask earlier. Or is this?
Yeah, you are.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So the Swedenborg, and I'm looking at you, and there's a picture of Swedenborg, so it's kind of funny to me.
Yeah, that's on purpose. But yes, you are on video.
Yeah. So it was really it was my pleasure to join the board, and to be a participant of the conversations around how do we develop this entity going forward that is tasked with spreading the writings, and that's it, you know. And first general convention, so convention as we call it, is my denomination, and then general church is the other one. And so, you know, I haven't run into any, you know, any big issues between the two groups. It was just cool meeting the other people. Of course, they're structured differently. So they have a bishop as the head of the church. And so everything's kind of like a top-down approach. And, you know, and I can have my criticisms with any type of structure, I'm sure. But it seems like, you know, they take, if the bishop says it, this is how we're going to do it, then everyone has to do it that way, or at least with the teachings. And so they don't allow, crazy enough, really, you know, reading the works, they don't allow women ministers, and they definitely don't allow queer ministers. And hearing the women ministry thing, you know, before my mind was really engaged with any, with real awareness around the other issues, you know, around like transgender, queer, and all that type of stuff. Just hearing that part about women, it's like mind blowing. Like, how is that possible? So it was right off the bat, I knew I couldn't really be associated with that group, at least in terms of membership, just because of my just how ridiculous I thought any position is where you say a woman can't be a minister, you know, and of course, how ridiculous it is to say someone who's queer can't be a minister or anything like that. And we can have our discussions around it, but it just seems insane to me. So, you know, there's that element to the other denomination, which is an interesting thing. It hasn't really come up at the Swedenborg Foundation. You know, we have a number of members, or a few members who are women who are from that denomination on the board, and then there's members of kind of the I don't know if it's not a fan club, but the kind of members of the Swedenborg Foundation, like people who support it. That runs the gamut, of course. And so it was interesting to know about the differences, but not really see them come up, you know, usually, or anything like that with the Swedenborg Foundation.
So it sounds like no one's kicked the hornet's nest yet at any board meetings that you've been a part of.
Yeah, well, I think there's a number of discussions that are going on, you know, in that denomination. You know, there's a number of people that in that group that don't support that position. You know, it's not like everyone's on the same page necessarily thing. And I know of a few. Actually, my minister, when I was in LA this last year, I'm still a member of the Garden Church there with Anna Woofenden. And Anna Woofenden, you know, was a member of the General Church, the other denomination, until this issue kind of came to a head for her, and she shifted over, and now she's a minister in convention. Fantastic minister as far as that goes. And so, yeah, it's you know, there's some kicking of the hornet's nest going on, and I think we all should be kicking our own hornet's nest plenty, because what else are we going to do? But yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, Swedenborg does not say only a man can be a minister or anything like that, and so it's kind of a funny thing. And even like, you know, he's big on symbolism, right? And so even like the symbolic use of man and woman in the text changes depending on the word, right? Like, so if it's like man, it could be one thing, but then husband, it could be something else. And then he says, of course, like a couple, like a married couple, is essentially considered one angel in heaven, right? And so then it's like, well, does a couple, like, do two people have to stand up there and minister? You know, like how literal are we going to get with like these type of extrapolations? And I think it's like with any kind of literal reading that is used to oppress people to whatever degree it is, with anything, right? It's more about us and how we aren't quite ready for anything greater because we have our hangups or we're coming from this place in tradition or in society. And we all have, hopefully infinite time to grow. So no condemnation on my part there, but it is sad, I think.
Yeah, well, I think it's great that you mentioned that we all have to kind of kick our own hornet's nest. I think that I appreciate you using that imagery in that regard because I think you're right that we bring our hangups a lot of the time. We all have our own individual baggage, and as you said, Swedenborg nowhere says only men can be ministers, and yet the general church does have that rule, and so it's sort of like a question of, well, where did that come from, and sort of the intersection between what text says, how people understand it, how people derive behavior or rules from it. I mean, it's a very, in my opinion, very much an interaction between uh, whole groups of people, humans, and what the text says and our understanding of it. So yeah, but I do like that image of we all have to kind of kick our own hornet's nest. So just looking at the time here, so we have about around 12 minutes left for me to be talking with you, Cory. So at this time, for anybody who's been watching, if anybody would like to ask a question of Cory or myself, either ask a question by leaving me a comment either on the Facebook page, Twitter, or on the YouTube live feed. If you'd like to actually come into the show and say something out loud, let me know, and I can get you the link to the show, and you can ask Cory or myself a question. I'm just looking around here, looking at all my tabs that are open. It looks like, I don't know if this is a coincidence, but someone new is now following me on Twitter, so don't know if that person's been listening to the show or not, but that's great. But I'm not seeing any comments or anyone asking to call in or any questions for us. So
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, please, by all means.
Have you been to a convention, or what's your interaction with the denominations so far?
Yeah, so I was actually, you and I were at convention at the same time, but
that's right, and
we were not introduced. Yeah, we were not introduced. In fact, I wasn't introduced to you or Rachel. So, or Rebecca. There was like people that I saw from a distance, and it just like didn't happen, for whatever reason. I was probably more obsessed with paying attention to George Dole and being a fanboy and getting him to sign a copy of one of the books of his that I had brought with me to convention. So, yeah. But I had a great experience. It was great to see people from all over North America, and to meet people whose names I had only heard in conversation or whose books I had only read. And I particularly, a highlight for me was, besides having the pleasure of talking with George Dole, was also to participate in the live episode of Reverend Wilma Wake's online ministry episode that I participated in a recording of that, or a live broadcast of her radio show, and that was a lot of fun because I had only talked to Reverend Wilma Wake once on the phone. We had corresponded online, and I'd read both of her books, and that was an awesome experience to talk with her in person and get to know her in person. So. Yeah, we're definitely blessed to have a nice, group of people that we all interact with. So, yeah, no complaints about convention. It was a great experience.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, I love how you were saying, symbolism about men and women and marriage. Also, I think one thing you commented on earlier was about kind of like I wrote down universalism, but accepting all people. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on. I mean, you yourself mentioned Unitarian Universalism and these other groups that are becoming more open to either the potential universal salvation of all folks, or just this open acceptance of all paths. And I'm just wondering if is that something that you are seeing pretty consistently at PSR, or do you see individuals who maybe are resisting that type of universalism, or what have been your experience as far as like application or talking to people about that subject?
That's an interesting question. Most people don't talk too much about who they think is going to hell. But I have met a few people who are maybe not as open to like a universalist type approach, whether it's like the Unitarian Universalists or like Swedenborg or anything like that. Like there's a couple people who are, this is the faith and you should think this, and that's what gets you that's what gets you the open door. But I gotta say that's a minority. I've only met a couple, if that. And so I think a lot of people here are still kind of, they're not necessarily all, on the seminary path. There's a number of degrees here, and there's a number of different ways to approach it and use it. And like I said, it's a very justice-oriented school, and a lot of people are involved with different movements and really cool things. And so I think for a lot of people, that's all nonsense. Like the whole only we are saved and you all are not. And so I mean, that kind of feeds back into like what kind of my idea of being there for seekers, or at least people who are interested in a theology that, at least to me, makes sense, and also says, heaven is a state, and of non-destruction and putting our egotism in the rightful place, whatever your religion. And so it's not as universalist in the sense that, like, Swedenborg, at least the way he describes it and says or thinks he saw it, heaven is a state. So it's not like a party you just get into and everyone wants to be there, right? As we talked about it. So people actively say, oh, that's my hell, right? Like, or, I don't like that at all, that place. And so, yeah, it's an interesting topic, because I think that's what scares a lot of people away from certain types of fundamentalism, is this idea that, like, my friend over there is going to hell because she doesn't think the way I do, or I would be going to hell if I was born across the street, in a different family. And I think it's pretty obvious to our hearts, at least, that that's nonsense. And so I think part of the exodus from religion is that so many major ones, or at least the major parts of major ones, think that way or preach that way, and it makes no sense to people. And then, and then maybe other ideas don't make sense to people either. And I know that was true for me. But no, I haven't. Most people don't talk too much about, who goes to heaven. Swedenborg, predates a lot of, accounts, or at least collected accounts of near-death experiences, which we have, particularly thanks to Raymond Moody, and online websites where people can write about what they have experienced. And I keep hearing accounts about how surprising it is, the number of people who've had those types of experiences, and just don't talk about it. And there's some really interesting studies, like the AWARE study and other things, where they're trying to approach near-death experiences with some type of structure so that it's unbiased and it's getting feedback from people who recently have had cardiac arrest. Their heart has stopped, because technically that's death in our terminology, at least in the West, is if your heart stops and doesn't beat again, you're dead, cardiac arrest. And so, but if your heart stops for 3 minutes and it beats again and you keep going, then you're not dead. And a lot of people who have had that type of experience have some type of trippy thing go on during it. And or at least it seems like it was during it, right? And so um, it's cool having Swedenborg with like such a long volume, Heaven and Hell, around it, and of course he intersplices spiritual stuff throughout all his theological works. Um, because for me, it's so similar to what I hear from people about near-death experiences, and it's kind of, that's just another kind of confirming thing for me, at least within my faith walk. It's just how consistent these experiences are for atheists, non-atheists, for different types of religious folks, when it comes to near-death experiences, and how they describe it as being more real than anything they've ever experienced, and all those, and like meeting loved ones. And of course, Swedenborg says, when you think of someone, like in the next life, you typically think of someone, the people who've died, or they think of you or are aware of it. And so they appear to you, because in the spiritual world, as kind of more like a quantum environment in my mind, if you think of someone, they appear to you, which is also kind of has a funny day. Now I want to talk to them. They can appear to you, kind of like what we're doing here. And so most religions don't have such thorough descriptions of the next life, right? It's kind of in passing, or in a judgment or glorification, like mention, and so I think without that, people, they just don't have anything to say about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think two great points that you raised in terms of descriptions of the afterlife, or details, and how much can we know, and really, it's like a lot of religions don't go into great detail about what the next life is going to be like, and I do think that it's amazing the things that Swedenborg wrote regarding the subject. But I also think you touched on another great point, which is the sort of like religious exodus. People are leaving the larger religions for a number of reasons, and for a lot of it, it has to do with this sort of dogmatic fundamentalism that we're sort of seeing, that's been around for, well, for a long time, but it's coming. It's now being challenged by, I think, a number of different groups, or we're sort of, there's definitely an evolution, I think, going on. And so would you say then that the new church, or the general convention, is a representation of a place for people who have left the old way of thinking about religion and are looking for something new and fresh? Would you say that the new church is represented by the general convention, or in general? No pun intended.
Yeah, I think General Convention can be a moderately worthy representative for the new church. As Swedenborg calls the new church as being, just this evolving connection with the divine that doesn't necessarily mean it takes Swedenborg's works, but definitely the General Convention is a beautiful place for me. And it tends to be a pretty liberal group of people, and you may not always find that with religious folk. And so, and obviously there's a mix, but I think it's a worthy. It's trying to be worthy. It's like any of us, right? Like, depends on where you look, but we're all trying to grow. I feel like I had something else to say, but I forget. Are you still there? I can't hear you if you're talking. Sorry. Sorry, I can't. I see the mic popping up, but I don't hear anything. That's our sign. You're all hello.
Okay. Oh. Well, everyone, I had some technical difficulties. I apologize for that. I think I've lost my guest. We're going to go on a quick break here. So I'm going to play, hopefully play some music here. Hold on. All right. Well, I was going to go on a break, but I'm having some technical difficulties. I guess that was the break. Saying goodbye to my guest. So yeah, I usually have a break, but when I went to go switch over from the headphones to the internal mic on the computer to have you all listen to the usual 5, song that I usually play during the intermission, for some reason the audio it wasn't picking up the audio, so I'm just having bundles of technical difficulty here. Before, when I started the show, I was having problems with the web browser opening, not opening, stuff like that. So that was Cory, who is a member of my congregation. He's also a member of my denomination, the Swedenborgian Church of North America, and or the General Convention of the New Jerusalem, or General Church, or whatever you'd like to call it. And he was discussing his journey to becoming a Swedenborgian minister. He's brand new to ministry. He is about a few months into his Masters of Divinity program. So I wanted to have him on the show to complement or contrast Tom Mueller's
episode where I had him on Halloween, because Tom is pretty much close to the end of his journey. He'll graduate next semester and then become an ordained minister. So I sort of want to get a different perspective as far as someone who's beginning their journey, and then someone who is just starting. So if you're just joining us, that is what you missed, but this will be archived. One of the more unfortunate technical difficulty experiences that I've had, but we're going to keep going now. And so I'm going to transition to Twitter. So I canceled last week's episode because of what happened in Paris. It felt very odd for me to, and I was going to have Cory on at that point, but he and I both agreed that it was odd to jump on to and talk about our subject. It just felt like we needed to kind of respect what had happened and give ourselves have a break from this. So prayers go out to everyone who's been affected by the Paris attacks, and also any other terror attacks that have occurred lately. I know that a lot of people were bringing up the fact that there wasn't quite as much of news coverage with regards to some of the other attacks that had happened lately. And so prayers to all, for Egypt, Lebanon, of course, Syria as well. A lot of controversy right now, as many of you know, I'm sure, regarding the Syrian refugees and where they will be placed, who will take them in, hearing different politicians saying different things. It is quite a circus, to say the least, considering everyone's different perspectives. Just looking at Facebook and Twitter, people coming at this from different perspectives. I'm looking at in that segue into something that I want to read from the New York Times that I will be opening up, as this will be the first news article. Donald Trump. I feel like today I've seen quotes from Donald Trump lately. He's been saying just these off-the-wall things, and I'm not going to apologize for my particular political persuasion. I am progressive and liberal. So yes, I do not agree with Donald Trump. I spoke to Republicans that I know personally who say that Donald Trump horrifies them so badly that they're probably going to vote Democrat because Trump is just a nut job. And so I feel like he is very much frightening individuals that are, reasonable individuals. The New York Times article I'm referring to was just published today. And the headline is Donald Trump calls for surveillance of certain mosques in a Syrian refugee database. So the article says Donald J. Trump said Saturday he would order surveillance of certain mosques to combat terrorism after the Paris attacks, and claimed to have watched as thousands and thousands of people were cheering while the World Trade Center towers fell on September 11, 2001. In a rally at the Birmingham Jefferson Convention Complex in Birmingham, Alabama, Mr. Trump, who is seeking the Republican presidential nomination, dismissed accounts of his apparent support for creating a registry of Muslims in the United States as an effort by the news media to entrap him. He then seemed to clarify that idea on Saturday, saying he wanted a database of refugees entering the country from Syria, and adding to cheers, "I want surveillance of certain mosques," okay? "We've had it before and we'll have it again," he added. Mr. Trump has recently spoken of the New York Police Department's use of informants in mosques after the September 11th attacks. It is unclear whether a database of Syrian refugees would be markedly different from the records already being kept in screening by federal agencies. But Mr. Trump, the leading Republican candidate in some polls, has been perhaps the most strident of all the contenders on the issue of whether to accept refugees after the Paris attacks, raising the possibility that some extremists could slip in among them and telling the crowd Saturday that should he win the presidency, the refugees are, quote, "going back. We can't have them," end quote. Earlier this year, Mr. Trump said that accepting a limited number of refugees from Syria was a humanitarian decision. Perhaps the most striking comment of the day was his recounting of the September 11th attacks as he talked about the security landscape since the Paris massacre. Quote, "Hey, I watched when the trade centers came tumbling down, and I watched in New Jersey, in Jersey City, New Jersey, where thousands and thousands of people were cheering as that building was coming down. Thousands of people were cheering. So something's going on. We've got to find out what it is, end quote. It was not clear what Mr. Trump was referring to. There were cheers of support in some Middle Eastern countries that day, which were broadcast on television. But a persistent internet rumor of Muslims celebrating in Paterson, New Jersey, was discounted by police officials at the time. A search of news accounts from that period shows no reports of mass cheering in Jersey City. Ibrahim Hooper, a spokesperson for the Council on American Islamic Relations, said the response of Muslim Americans on September 11th was discussed. Quote, "I know because I wrote it," he said of the council's reactions, adding that if Mr. Trump had evidence of cheering, he should present it. Hope Hicks, a spokeswoman for Mr. Trump, would not elaborate on his comments. His aides have repeatedly declined to make him available to address the controversies over some of his statements. Ms. Hicks said only that Mr. Trump had drawn an unprecedented crowd of 10,000 in Birmingham, adding, quote, "Mr. Trump's speech was great and unbelievably well received," end quote. Since the November 13th attacks in Paris by Islamic extremists, which killed 130 people, the national mood has turned against admitting refugees from Syria, where the Islamic State is taking control of certain areas. A poll by Bloomberg Politics showed last week. And Mr. Trump has been riding a wave of anger and mistrust of government and politicians since he entered the race in June. Mr. Trump's calls for surveillance came after he said earlier in the week that he supported closing some mosques. He has not been alone in making such calls. A top donor to Hillary Rodham Clinton has also urged such surveillance in the wake of the Paris attacks. The donor, Haim Sabin, later said he had misspoken. Meanwhile, at the Alabama rally, a protester whom Mr. Trump called to have ejected, quote, "Get him the hell out of here," he ordered security guards, was punched and kicked by some attendees, CNN reported. The protester, whose shirt saying Black Lives Matter and refused to leave the rally, was hit by roughly a half dozen attendees, CNN said. The police told the network that the man had not required medical attention. Ms. Hicks did not respond to an email asking about the removal of the protester. So, unbelievable. So, not only do we have, it's Birmingham, Alabama, and Trump is doing this rally, and he is saying that there should be surveillance of mosques, and that there should be some mosque, talk of just mosques in general, a registry of Syrian refugees. And, and what sort of mind boggles me about this is, there's no, amongst the Syrian refugees, it's not all Muslims, right? You've got Christians, you've got, I would imagine, just a number of different groups that are making up the Syrian refugees. And I just think that it is amazing that people are taking what happened in Paris, and they are essentially saying, well, see, we can't have these people here. These people who are refugees are escaping ISIS, right? Because, the biggest people a huge percentage of people who have been killed by ISIS are other Muslims. Mosques have been blown up. Sacred temples and sites of various religions, both ancient and current, have been destroyed. ISIS is slaughtering tons of people, and I just think that it's, they are leaving. The refugees are leaving because I'd imagine right now, life in Iraq and Syria sucks. And they want out of the madness, and they are trying to find a new place to live, just so they, it's a survival right now. But in some ways, I wasn't too surprised by the reaction that people are having right now to Donald. Who would voice Donald Trump, because this was exactly what happens in a number of different refugee situations. I was reminded of when the United States rejected Jewish refugees during World War II and the Depression. And I'm glad that I'm not the only one who's pointed that out, because I believe it was the New York Times as well, who also pointed out a very creepy parallel this trend the United States has. It's like on one hand, we have the Statue of Liberty, we have Ellis Island, we have Angel Island, we have this history of immigrants coming here from around the world to become citizens, some refugees, some not, and but all with the intent of finding sanctuary. And it's just amazing how the United States in particular goes through this cycle of amnesia, you know, that we have different groups who have arrived, and yet when these groups arrive, the people who were here prior, the earliest immigrants who settled down, turn to the newer group and just totally crap on them and find ways to keep them out, or they're highly suspect of them and think that they could lead to sedition or terrorism. I mean, this is something that's been going on for some time. And so in some ways this is not new what Donald Trump is saying, but I really would encourage everyone to look at history, and I think it's very true that history does indeed repeat itself on a very regular basis, and some groups just can't seem to shake some of these patterns. And so I do hope that the children that need help, the Syrian children that need help the most, you know, I really think, in all honesty, that parents with their small children who are trying to get out of the madness of what's happening in the Middle East right now, when I see photos of fathers with their small children, you know, I don't see a terrorist in the making. I see a refugee who was a small child that needs help. And if people, like some of the conservatives would say, is that the United States is a Christian nation, when I see the stuff about, you know, the hostility towards these refugees, and also hostility towards the person, the guy who was ejected from the auditorium, you know, he was attacked by like multiple people. Right? I just don't. Where's the Christianity in any of that? I don't see it. I don't remember the verse where Jesus says, when you're giving a speech and there's a guy who has a dissenting voice at your shindig, you should like strike him over and over again. You know, you should like beat up on him and then and eject him from the auditorium. Don't remember that verse. I don't remember the verse that says anything about, you know, if there's someone in need who's asking you for assistance, you should take a registry of them so you can monitor them, and you should probably just reject them anyway, right? Kick them out. Don't give them shelter to those in need. Don't remember that verse either. So I'm not really convinced about this whole thing about a Christian nation when obviously people aren't acting like Christians, at least in the biblical sense. I want to transition now to something else that's a little personal that has to do with the Paris attacks. A few weekends ago, might have been the weekend before Halloween actually, I attended a 2-day heavy metal concert, and that's why there was no show that day. And one of the bands that was at this heavy metal show was the Eagles of Death Metal, and they were the band that was playing live when the terror attacks happened in Paris. Several of their fans were killed in the venue that they were playing, and Vice.com has an article on them. And I'd like to read this article because they are an excellent band. As far as none of the band was killed in the attack, but several of their fans were. Vice.com's headline is "Coming Soon, Eagles of Death Metal Speak Out for the First Time Since the Paris Attacks." While reporting on last week's horrific terror attacks in Paris, we realized with shock that the band playing at the Bataclan, the venue where 89 rock fans had their lives taken, was Eagles of Death Metal. You never expect the people you know to be caught up in such things, but Eagles are a band we've interviewed many times before, and Jesse Hughes, the lead singer, hosted a video series on Vice's music channel, Noisy. While Jesse and the band thankfully survived, some of the people closest to them did not. They include the band's merchandise manager, Nick Alexander, as well as 3 colleagues from the record label, Thomas Ayad, Marie Mosseur, and Manu Perez. This week, Vice founder Shane Smith sat down with Jesse and bandmate Joshua Home, talk about those they lost and what happened that night, and try to figure out what it is that they and we can do next. The interview will premiere next week on Vice News. So that's a little teaser there. Our love goes out to those affected by recent terrorism and violence in Paris, Beirut, Nigeria, Mali, Syria, Iraq, and far too many other places to mention. So I would encourage everyone, if you're interested in music, artists, to watch that interview when it airs. Glad to see that Vice.com has decided to post something there. There's just most of the things that I'm seeing on my Twitter feed have to do with Paris, which should come to no surprise to anyone, considering what has happened. Another New York Times opinion piece headline: in Saudi Arabia, the focus is on Iran, but extremism and sectarian divisions are also threats. We're seeing the change that is occurring here. A quote from Murmi from Twitter: "The purpose of this life is for 2 friends to meet each other and sit face to face in the spirit of God." That's actually a quote from Shams of Tabriz. Yes, if only we could have more moments of people sitting face to face with each other and having good conversation in the spirit, as opposed to a lot of the violence that is happening right now around the world. Well, everyone, I think I'm going to call it early today. I know I was having some technical difficulties. I didn't have a chance to take the break. I want to thank Cory again. I'm just going to check all my tabs to see if anybody's trying to say that they want to call in or ask a question. I'm not seeing anything. Again, I apologize for the technical difficulties starting the show late. The weird audio problem I was having before. I want to thank my guest, Cory, again for coming on. If anyone has any questions about or any suggestions for future episodes, I have talked to Klingshore. He was very busy. Now he's less busy, and he has an interest of coming back onto the show. I also have a Swedish theology student who's expressed interest in coming onto the show as a guest. Just a question of timing because of the time difference. But more interesting topics coming up. I have recently been reading a number of different spiritual perspectives, reading a little bit more about Gnosticism. So I'm hoping to have some topics in the future about some of the things that I've been learning in terms of recent books that I've been reading. I read Richard Dawkins' newest autobiography, and I have some thoughts and reflections on that as well, which will probably come out as either a blog post or a standalone YouTube video. So I don't really have anybody scheduled. I'm just looking here. Next Saturday. So hopefully next Saturday we'll actually have a show. Something about my work might interfere. It's a Saturday after Thanksgiving, the 28th. But I'm hoping to have a show on the 28th. I don't know who will be the guest. I don't know what the topic's going to be, but please tune in for 30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Hopefully we won't have any technical difficulty problems, or at least they'll be minimal. I should say that December 5th, there will not be a show. I have actually an event that I am attending that day, and so I will. The show will not be happening on Saturday, December 5th. So I hope to have you all tune in next Saturday, 4:30 Pacific Standard Time, for Dreaming in Symbols episode number 15. Once I have a topic sort of figured out or a guest picked and ready to go, pay attention to Twitter and the Facebook page, and I will be announcing more details as we get closer to Saturday. Next Saturday the 28th. I hope for all of you who are celebrating Thanksgiving, I hope you all have a great Thanksgiving. Any other holidays that are happening next week, for anyone around the world, everyone be safe, and hope you're all doing well. Thank you all for listening. Peace be with you all.